First, a small request. If these words find you, if they mean something, please like and subscribe to Johnny Ringer. It helps these stories find a home. Now let us begin. My grandfather was a man made of questions. His name was Lee Rinker, but even that felt like a borrowed coat. Something he wore, but that wasn't truly his own. Growing up, he was a photograph on the mantelpiece, a ghost in my father's stories. My father spoke of him with a strange mix of love and confusion, like describing a storm that had passed long ago but whose winds you could still feel on your skin. He was a good man, my father would say, a quiet man, but the silence was a character in itself, a heavy blanket that covered everything. I remember asking my father what his father did. He'd shrug, his eyes distant. He worked for the government, he'd say. He fixed things. But what things? Where? The answers were always smoke, curling away just as I tried to grasp them. This was the legacy I inherited, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Lee Rinker was a hero, I was told, but the details of his heroism were locked away. It made me wonder what kind of hero needs to hide his own story. It made me wonder about the man behind the myth, the man my father knew, and the man nobody knew at all. The silence was not empty, it was filled with unspoken words, with a history I could feel but not see. The mystery of Lee Rinker shaped our family. It was a central absence, a sun that had gone dark, yet we all still orbited it. My father, his son, seemed to carry the weight of that silence on his shoulders. He was a kind man, but there was a sadness in him, a longing for a connection that felt just out of reach. He tried to build a life filled with noise and laughter, perhaps to fill the quiet spaces his own father had left behind. He wanted to give me the answers he never received. But how can you give someone a map when you were never shown the territory yourself? The questions lingered, passed down from father to son. And so, I became a seeker. I looked for clues in old photographs, in the rare moments my grandmother would speak of the past. She would mention Vienna, a place that sounded like a fairy tale, but her voice would tremble. She would talk about Panama, a land of sunshine and warmth, where she fell in love with a man who carried shadows in his eyes. The story was there, scattered like fragments of a broken mirror. I felt a duty to piece it together, not just for me but for my father, for the quiet man in the photograph. I needed to understand the silence. I needed to know the true story of Lee Rinker. Vienna, 1938. Imagine it. The air is thick with the smell of roasted chestnuts and the sound of waltzes spilling from open windows. Lee Rinker is a young man then, not yet a ghost or a mystery. He is the son of a brewer, his hands calloused from rolling heavy barrels of golden beer. The brewery is his world, a place of comforting routine and the sweet, malty scent of his family's legacy. He knows every pipe, every vat, every secret of the craft. Life is simple. It is good. He has friends. He has dreams. He believes in the future, a future that tastes like his father's finest lager. But a shadow is falling over the city. It creeps through the cobblestone streets, a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. Swastikas hang from buildings like spiders, their black legs stark against the old stone. Soldiers in brown shirts march with a sound like thunder, their boots striking the pavement in a rhythm of hate. Friends start to disappear. Jewish shopkeepers find their windows shattered, their businesses ruined. The familiar sounds of Vienna are being replaced by something ugly, something violent. The waltz is fading, replaced by the drumbeat of war. Lee sees it, he feels it. The brewery, once a sanctuary, now feels like a cage. Lee's father is a practical man. He is also a brave one. He sees the darkness coming and knows he cannot fight it with beer and goodwill. But he has other connections. He is part of a network, a quiet resistance of thinkers, scientists, and ordinary people who understand the true nature of the Nazi threat. They know about the Reich's ambitions, their research into new and terrible weapons. They have documents, formulas, and schematics that cannot be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. The papers detail early atomic research, a terrifying possibility that the world is not yet ready to face. They need someone to carry this knowledge to safety, someone young, strong, and clever. They choose Lee, the brewer's son. He is not a soldier, he is not a spy, but he is invisible in a way that matters. He knows the land, he can be trusted. His father gives him the mission, his eyes filled with a terrible mixture of pride and fear. Escape, he tells him. Take these papers and get them to the Allies. Do not let them be captured. This is more important than the brewery, more important than our lives. And so, Lee Rinker's old life ends. He packs a small bag, says a silent goodbye to the city he loves, and slips into the night, a heavy secret stitched into the lining of his coat. The escape was not a single act but 1,000 small deaths. The death of his name, the death of his home, the death of the boy he used to be. Lee moved through the darkness like a fox, the forest his only ally. He walked for days, the rustling leaves his only companions. The secret documents sewn into his jacket felt like a block of ice against his chest, a constant cold reminder of his mission. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot, every shadow looked like a soldier. He learned the language of fear, how it tasted like metallic bile in the back of his throat, how it made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. He skirted villages, places that once would have offered warmth and a meal. Now they were traps. He saw the flags hanging in the town squares. He heard the harsh commands of patrolling guards. He begged for food from isolated farmhouses, offering the last of his coins for a piece of stale bread or a handful of withered apples. Some doors slammed in his face, others opened just a crack, a frightened pair of eyes peering out before a hand offered him something to eat, a silent act of defiance. He slept in barns, the smell of hay and animals a small comfort, a reminder of a simpler, safer world he had left behind. He was alone, but he carried the weight of millions on his shoulders. One night, huddled in a ditch as a military convoy rumbled past, the headlights sweeping just over his head, he nearly gave up. The cold had seeped into his bones, hunger was a constant gnawing ache in his stomach. He thought of his father, of the warm brewery, of the life that had been stolen from him. Despair was a tempting poison. It whispered to him, telling him to stop, to rest, to let go. But then he would touch the papers in his coat. He would remember his father's face. He would remember the promise he made. This was bigger than him. This was for a world that could still be saved. After weeks that felt like years, he reached the border. It was a river, fast and cold with patrols on the far side. He waited for the darkest part of the night, his body trembling from cold and exhaustion. He slipped into the icy water, the current pulling at him, threatening to drag him under. He held his coat above his head, protecting the precious secret within. When his feet finally touched the muddy bank on the other side, he collapsed, gasping for air. He had made it, but he was not safe yet. He was just a boy, alone in a foreign land, with a secret that could change the course of history. He stumbled through the unfamiliar countryside for another day before he saw them. Soldiers. Not in the brown shirts of the Nazis, but in the drab olives and khakis of the Allies. He didn't run. He had no strength left for that. He simply stood there, a scarecrow of a boy, and waited. They approached him with suspicion, their rifles ready. They shouted at him in a language he barely understood. He raised his hands, his voice a dry croak. "Vienna," he said. "Papers. Important." He reached into his coat, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out the small, oilskin-wrapped package. He had carried it across mountains and rivers. He had protected it with his life. The soldiers took the package, their suspicion turning to curiosity, then to urgency. They took Lee to a makeshift command post, a flurry of activity surrounding him. They gave him a blanket, hot coffee, and a piece of bread that tasted like heaven. An officer arrived, a man with intelligent, weary eyes. He opened the package carefully. He spread the papers on a wooden table. He read them, his expression growing more and more grim. He looked up at Lee, a new respect in his eyes. "You have any idea what you were carrying, son?" he asked. Lee shook his head. He only knew it was important. He had no idea it was the key to the most terrible weapon ever conceived. His journey was not over. It had just changed direction. Lee was flown to England, then to America. He was no longer a refugee, but a vital asset. He was debriefed for weeks by men in suits who asked him the same questions over and over. They wanted to know everything about the German scientists, about the facilities, about the progress they had made. Lee told them what he knew, the memories of Vienna feeling like a lifetime away. They gave him a new name, a new identity. Lee Rinker was born out of necessity, a name to hide the brewer's son from Vienna. He was a ghost, officially non-existent, a man who had walked out of one life and into another. He was then taken to a place that did not exist on any map. Los Alamos, New Mexico, a secret city in the desert filled with the brightest minds in the world. Here, under the vast, empty sky, they were building a bomb, the very weapon described in the papers he had carried. He met J. Robert Oppenheimer. He even had a brief, unforgettable encounter with Albert Einstein, whose own theories had paved the way for this terrible creation. Einstein looked at him with sad, knowing eyes, as if he could see the weight the young man carried. Lee wasn't a physicist, but he understood the mechanics, the engineering. He worked quietly, diligently, helping to build the machine that his own courage had helped bring to the Allied side. After the war, the world tried to heal. But for a man like Lee Rinker, a man with a head full of secrets, there was just no going back to a normal life. The government that had created him, well, they still had a use for him. They sent him to Panama. The official story was that he was an engineer working on the canal. It was a pretty plausible cover. But his real job was quieter, more clandestine. He was, basically, an observer, a listener. He was supposed to watch the shipping lanes to monitor for Soviet influence in a region of, critical strategic importance. He had traded the desert of New Mexico for the humid jungle of Central America. The work was still steeped in silence and secrecy. It was in Panama that he saw her. Her name was Tita. She worked at a small cafe near the canal zone, her smile as bright as the tropical sun. She moved with a grace that honestly captivated him. For the first time since leaving Vienna, Lee felt something other than fear, duty, or the dull ache of loss. He felt a flicker of hope. He started visiting the cafe every day just to see her. He was shy, a quiet man who carried the world's shadows in his eyes. She was vibrant, full of life and laughter. She saw the sadness in him, but she was not afraid of it. She saw the goodness underneath. Their courtship was, well, a gentle dance. He would sit at his table, and she would bring him his coffee, her hand brushing his as she set it down. They talked about simple things, the weather, the ships passing through the canal, the taste of mangoes. He never spoke of Vienna, of the war, of the bomb. That part of his life was a locked room, and he had thrown away the key. He wanted a new life, a life built on the sunshine and warmth that Tita offered. She didn't press him for details about his past. She accepted him as he was, a kind, solitary man with a mysterious history. She fell in love with the man, not his story. They married under a canopy of bougainvillea, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and the sea. They built a simple life together. They had a son. Lee was a devoted husband and a loving father. He fixed his son's toys. He taught him how to swim in the warm Pacific waters. He created a world of safety and stability, a world he himself had never truly known. He poured all his energy into being a normal man, a family man. He buried Lee Rinker the spy, Lee Rinker the hero, Lee Rinker the brewer's son from Vienna. He locked the past away, believing that silence was the only way to protect his new family from the shadows he carried. My father grew up in the shadow of that silence. He loved his father, of that there is no doubt. He remembers a man who was gentle and present, a man who would spend hours patiently helping him with his schoolwork. But there was a wall, a glass wall, invisible but impenetrable. My father could see his father, but he could never truly reach him. There were questions he learned not to ask, questions about where he was from, about his family, about the war. When he would try, Lee would grow quiet, his gaze would drift to some distant horizon, and the conversation would end. The silence was a form of protection, but it felt like a rejection. This unspoken history became the central truth of my father's life. He felt like a character in a book with the first chapter ripped out. He didn't know his own heritage. He had no grandparents to speak of, no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. It was as if his father had sprung into existence in Panama, fully formed, with no past. This lack of a story left a void. My father spent his life trying to fill it, becoming a man who valued connection and openness above all else. He was determined that his own son, me, would never feel that same sense of disconnect. He gave me the love and answers he never got. The impact on my father was profound. He felt a constant low-level anxiety, a sense that something was missing. He struggled with a sense of identity. Who was he, if he didn't know where he came from? The Rinker name felt hollow, a label with no history attached. He saw other families with their rich tapestries of stories, their shared memories stretching back generations. His own history began and ended with his father's silence. It was a heavy burden to carry, the feeling that your own roots had been deliberately severed. He loved Lee, but he also resented the secrets he kept. Lee Rinker believed he was doing the right thing. He thought he was shielding his family from the horrors he had witnessed and the dangerous knowledge he possessed. He had seen what the world was capable of, and he wanted to build a fortress of peace and normality for his wife and son. He did not understand that his silence was not a shield, but a wall. It kept the darkness out, but it also kept the light of his own true self from shining through. He gave his son a safe life, but he denied him a full legacy. The hero's journey remained untold, and its silence echoed through the generations. My grandfather, Lee Rinker, passed away when I was a boy. He was still the quiet man from the photographs, his secrets buried with him. Years later, after my grandmother Tita had also passed, my father and I were tasked with clearing out their small house in Panama. It was a house filled with memories of sunshine and love, but also with the lingering presence of my grandfather's silence. We sorted through clothes, furniture, and decades of accumulated life. In the back of a dusty wardrobe, tucked away in an old shoebox, we found it. A small leather-bound journal. It was written in German, a language my father did not speak. My father held the journal as if it were a sacred object. His hands trembled slightly. This was it. This was the locked room. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of unanswered questions. "We have to know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. We found a translator, an elderly woman who had fled Germany herself many years ago. We sat with her in her small apartment, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, as she began to read. The first words she translated were, "My name is not Lee Rinker. My name is Leo Rinkert, and I am the son of a brewer from Vienna." As she read, the story of my grandfather's life unfolded before us. It was like watching a black and white film come to life in vivid color. We heard about the brewery, the rising threat of the Nazis, the fear that permeated the city. We felt the cold of the forest, the gnawing hunger of his escape. We saw him clutching the secret papers, his heart pounding as he crossed the river to freedom. We were there with him in the desert of Los Alamos, a young man burdened with a terrible knowledge. The translator's voice was steady, but my father and I were weeping silently. The ghost on the mantelpiece was becoming a man. The journal told of his love for Tita, of his joy at becoming a father. He wrote of his deep, aching desire to protect his new family from his past. "How can I tell my son of the world I have seen?" he wrote. "How can I give him a peaceful heart if I show him the darkness in my own?" The words were a confession, an explanation, a plea for understanding. He had chosen silence not out of shame or lack of love, but out of a profound, misguided sense of protection. He was trying to be a hero in the only way he knew how, by burying the monster of the past so it could never harm his family. The journal changed everything. For my father, it was as if the missing chapter of his life had finally been written. The silence that had defined his relationship with his father was suddenly filled with words of courage, sacrifice, and a deep, protective love. The resentment he had carried for so long melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of pride, and a profound sadness for the burden his father had carried alone. He finally understood that the distance he had felt was not a lack of affection, but a measure of his father's pain. Lee Rinker had not been a cold man, he had been a man guarding a fire that he feared would burn everyone he loved. We learned the cost of his secrecy. The journal revealed moments of deep loneliness, of his longing to share his story with his wife, to tell his son about the brave man his grandfather had been. He wrote about nightmares that still haunted him decades later. He had saved the world from a terrible possibility, but he could not save himself from the memories. He had paid a price for his heroism, and that price was a lifetime of isolation with his own past. He had built a family, but he remained in a way in exile, a stranger in his own life, forever separated from them by the wall of his secrets. Uncovering the truth was a healing balm. My father and I talked for hours, for days. We reread the journal, piecing together the life of Leo Rinkert from Vienna. My father began to see himself differently. He was not the son of an anonymous government worker, but the son of a resistance hero. He had a heritage, a story of incredible bravery and conviction. The Rinker name was no longer hollow, it was filled with the weight of history. He had roots, and they were planted in the soil of courage. He could finally look at the photograph on the mantelpiece and see not a mystery, but a man he truly knew and deeply admired. The legacy Lee passed down was more complex than he ever intended. He meant to give his family peace, but he gave them a puzzle. He meant to protect them from pain, but he created a different kind of ache, the ache of the unknown. But in the end, through the discovery of his journal, he gave us the greatest gift of all, the truth. The truth allowed for understanding. It allowed for healing. It allowed my father to finally make peace with the memory of the silent man he had loved. It taught us that stories, even painful ones, are not burdens. They are anchors. They are what connect us to each other and to our own history. The story of Leo Rinkert, who became Lee Rinker, is not written in history books. His name is not on any monuments. He was a silent hero, one of the countless ordinary people who did extraordinary things in the face of darkness. His legacy is not one of public acclaim but of quiet, profound impact. His courage changed the path of the war, his silence shaped a family, his final written words brought healing to his son and grandson. He shows us that history is not just made by generals and presidents but by brewers' sons who choose to walk into the night with a secret stitched into their coats. This journey into my family's past taught me something vital. It taught me that we are all carrying stories. Some we tell freely, others we keep locked away. We must encourage each other to share them. We must be brave enough to listen. Secrecy, even when born from love, can create wounds that last for generations. It is through the telling of our truths that we find connection, understanding, and healing. My grandfather thought he was protecting his family by burying his story, but the story was his greatest treasure. It was his true legacy, more valuable than any inheritance of money or property. My father is a different man now. The sadness that once lingered in his eyes has been replaced by a quiet pride. He speaks of his father often, telling the story of the escape from Vienna, of the courage it took. He is no longer the son of a mystery, he is the son of a hero, and I am the grandson. The story now lives in me, and I have a responsibility to tell it. It is a story of war and peace, of secrets and truth, of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It is the story of how one man's hidden life once uncovered could bring a family together and give them back their past. And so, we arrive at the end. But it is also a beginning. My grandfather's story is no longer a secret. It is a testament to the importance of memory. It reminds us that behind every quiet face, there may be a universe of untold tales. Let us seek them out. Let us honor them. And one last thing, if this story has touched you, please like and subscribe to Johnny Rinker. It allows these legacies to live on. Thank you for listening.